do you want to test your sound just to make sure
am I audible?
Yes, indeed you are.
Perfect.
Fantastic.
I had to, perfect. Yeah, I had to switch to Chromium, but this seems to work. So
Cool. All right. Well, it is time. So I'll switch us back to the other slides. My slides. And say good whatever time it is for you, 5 a.m. for me, in whatever part of the world you are. Thank you for joining us. This is the very first session of the SEDATE working group at IETF. As you can see, I updated part of the date, but not all of it. So the date on these slides is wrong, which I guess is probably about the right thing for this working group. So there we go, kicking us off to a great start. This document here is the Notewell, which is the rules under which the IETF works. In particular, if you are aware of any patents that apply to the work we're doing today, your choices are basically to not contribute at all to our work on the standard or to state what patents you're aware of. There are also a bunch of other policies about how the IETF works, anti-harassment procedures, code of conduct, everything to do with copyright, etc. So please read those if you're not aware of them. With that said, this is our agenda for what we're going to do today. First, an introduction and kind of a background to how we got here. Any agenda bashing. So if you have anything else you want to speak about other than the one document we have here, please let us know at this stage. Milestone and review for the charter on this working group and any other business that comes up. Mark has kindly offered to transcribe to the Cody MD, my co-chair, and I think between that and given how small the group is, please feel free to chat pretty much anytime. I think Ujwal will let us know whether he'd prefer to take questions as we go or at the end. But given how small this working group is, I don't think we need to stand on too much procedure, unless things get out of hand, in which I'll step in and throw some procedure in. All right. So some quick background on how we got here. Oh yes, first introduction, here's the background on us. Here's who the two chairs are. Feel free to contact us at any time. Email address sedate-chairs@ietf.org will reach both of us. Otherwise, you can find our email addresses directly in the data tracker. Francesca is our lovely area director and is very helpful. So any questions about us, please contact her. And of course, you can email the mailing list about anything as well. And our charter is available online, so you can see precisely what we were supposed to do. I put together a rough timeline of how we got to where we are now. A little over a year ago, ECMA TC39 first contacted CalConnect about collaborating on date time format they were working on. TC39 contacted CalExt at the IETF in October last year. This was then taken to the dispatch session. We didn't quite get it organized in time for IETF 109. It was briefly mentioned there, but not a serious proposal. At IETF 110, this work was dispatched to a new working group, which was formed on July 3rd, and now you are here. We are starting our work. This is an overview of our charter, what our goals are and are not. We will publish a text serialization format for context around the timestamp, which is a companion to RFC 3339, embeds RFC 3339 data in a way that makes it easy to parse just that date time out of it and is able to round trip through intermediate systems. We'll coordinate with ECMA TC39 and ISO TC154, which are the groups that are also working on these things, to ensure that the work remains a strict extension of ISO 8601, which was recently revised. But everything we've seen seems to suggest that there's no collisions at the moment, and we are coordinating with people from those groups. We will not make any updates to RFC 3339 without rechartering this working group, and we will not destabilize existing IETF protocols or the internet generally, and that's copy-pasted straight from our charter. This is the document. It wasn't formally adopted as part of the chartering process, so the first order of business after it's been presented is going to formally adopt the document. If anyone wants to speak to that before we start looking at the document, feel free to hop in the queue. Final call always will go to the mailing list, of course, for the adoption. And given that it's our one order of business, I expect that will go fairly smoothly. But yeah, if you do have any objections or any questions about the document, now's a good time to pop in. So I'll give you a moment for that. And just before I switch slide decks, is there any other business people would like to discuss at this working group, at this meeting? I'll just pop over and look at the chat as well. Doesn't look like it. It's all just technical discussion about how to work. Fantastic. All right, I will hand you over then.
Wait, can maybe I try to share my screen? Would that work?
I can let you share your screen, or you can ask for slide control, I believe, and then you can control these slides that are already loaded in. So it's up to you.
Okay. Yeah, either works for me, but the slides I suspect are PDF, so it would be nicer for me to just share the screen.
Fantastic. Then that sounds good to me. I will unshare the slides. If you request screen sharing, there should be a button in your top left hand of your screen. Yep. And then I can grant you screen sharing. Excellent. I'll pop myself on mute while you're talking.
Okay, tell me if you see this. Do folks see my slides?
You can see your slides.
Oh, okay, perfect. Sorry. Hello, and thank you, Ron, for the awesome introduction. And I just patched together a small set of slides. So let's get through these, and we can get into the discussion more. So just a little bit of context. I am Ujwal. Nice to meet you if you haven't yet. And you can find me on the internet at Rise of Putin. So if you want to shout at me anyway, that's what you're looking at. Just to remind you where we're coming from, I am a delegate for ECMA TC39. The ECMA TC39 is, for some background, the committee, the standards committee that standardizes ECMAScript or JavaScript. There's a bunch of really cool members who contribute different viewpoints to this committee. Specifically, I also belong to a smaller group called the Temporal Champions Group, who are tasked with standardizing a replacement for the JavaScript date object, and hopefully improve it for the better. And so we're building a more modern ergonomic API for building date and time applications. That's what this all comes out of. And yeah, the group is composed of a very diverse set of individuals. So the history, I mean, Braun tried to give a good background, but from my end, the history starts where we have a number of non-standard zone timestamp formats, right? They're all over the internet, and they're not really standardized. There's a format that just adds some white space and then does the time zone, and then there's the brackets, and there's just no consensus there. And temporal needs to take things a bit further, and we need to add calendars to the mix, and this becomes complicated because there's no standardized format to build on top of, right? There's just good old 3239. The Champions Group designed a format ourselves that was inspired partly by BCP47, and that built on top of ISO 8601 or 3239. And we presented that to CalConnect, to ISO, and to the CalX group here at IETF. That all culminated with me giving a presentation to Dispatch in IETF111. You can see those slides over here. But all in all the follow-up discussions led to this working group that we're in right now. So SEDATE comes out of sort of this effort to add extensions and more metadata to timestamp formats. What has changed since the time that we touched base on this last time? So initially we came with a very ambitious proposal, and we not only tried to standardize the annotation format, but we tried to sort of modernize 53.9 as it was, remove some of the things that we thought at the time were not in sync with the current state of ISO 8601, and add a bunch of cool things. We've we've reached more realistic goals at this point. I think it was a good idea uh, to not make any radical changes to the underlying format that so many people depend on, and instead build on top of that as sort of an extension format. So that's where we are right now. So yeah, we build on top of 3.9, and updates to the core instant timestamp format is out of scope. Temporal in TC39 lingo, temporal is stage 3, which means that implementations are now ongoing. The design of the API that we built is finalized, and different browsers are starting to implement the proposal. That's where we are at TC39 sites, and we are in the sedate one, we are in conversations with ISO for a liaison agreement, and getting things going on that front. The draft that was linked to before, which we are hoping to adopt, underwent another round of reviews. So it's changed, and it's leaner now. So hopefully it will be better. But yeah, all further reviews would be really appreciated. So this is the good old format that we're talking about, right? This is how instants look on the internet, and this is sort of the uh, other format that we see a lot. Sorry for the text breaking this way, but if you see here at the end of this instant, there's an additional Europe/London, uh, you know, uh, annotation, and this is supposed to mean that this particular time zone, this particular timestamp is within the context of this human time zone, uh, and this is what we've been planning. So apart from this annotation that we just talked about, there can be another annotation for the for the calendar, in this case Hebrew. So why is this context useful? Why do we do this at all? What's so wrong with, or why are the existing formats not sufficient for us? Is that operations that are done on any instant relies on this context, right? The current model, where there is no context, it assumes one of two things. It assumes that there is no information at all, which is bad, because there is information. It's just it's not conveyed, and it's not being it's not traveling between the different programs that are communicating this information. Or it assumes that the time zone in this case would be UTC, or the calendar is the so-called ISO calendar, which is the proleptic Gregorian calendar, which is worse. It is worse because UTC is not a human time zone. Nobody lives in UTC. You could live in Europe, Reykjavik, or you could be living in Europe, London, but that's not UTC. It's a different time zone, and it can change and do different things. And the ISO calendar is not something that people use in their sort of daily lives either. It's people most commonly use the Gregorian calendar, but other calendars too, of course. So this can be bad in many ways, and I think the best idea is to specify a mechanism for implementations to convey this information, and to transport it between each other. So for example, if I take the time instant right now and I add 5 hours to it, right? That operation depends on which time zone I'm in. Uh, if it's 1 p.m. right now, and if I add 5 hours, it doesn't mean necessarily that it would be 6 p.m. That might mean 7 or 5 or so on, depending on the time zone and the daylight savings rules and so on. And similarly, now plus 5 months actually depend on the calendar, because you know the amount of days in a calendar, amount of days in the month depend on the calendar, and even like leap months and stuff depend on the calendar. So that's the motivation generally. But why this syntax? Why have we come down to this particular syntax that we are on right now? We believe in a few things, and these were the things that we use as sort of guiding principles. First was that the suffix should be optional. All existing compliant strings, that people are using in their software right now should just work. In the suffix should just be additional information that should not be necessary in determining the in the instant itself. The time zone suffix was actually borrowed from Java for compatibility reasons. So you might be wondering why sort of this generalized format is present, but then at the same time there's this non-generalized times, like snowflake time zone part, and that's because Java and other tools already utilize this format, and it's better to allow that for compatibility reasons. Uh, After that, we everything else is added in a sort of generalized format, which is inspired by BCP 47. Uh, and when I say it's inspired by BCP 47, I mean that it's namespaced in order to keep the RFC itself focused. This I mean, of course, all of these are implementation details that we can argue about. But at the time, the champions believed that keeping the actual data, the set of keys and the set of acceptable values out of the RFC would mean that the RFC can stay focused, and it could focus on standardizing the format itself. And then there could be other ways in which we could specify the keys and the values that they can hold. Uh, and for that part, we borrowed the IANA registry pattern from BCP 47. So just for a little bit of context, what happens in BCP 47 is that there's different namespaces, like the U namespace, which is registered by Unicode, and then everything which is U hyphen something is governed by Unicode. So they can it's their responsibility to maintain a list of the keys that are acceptable there, and the set of values that they accept, and the RFC itself can stay focused on their syntax. But that's just, of course, one of the many ways we can do this. So uh, and yeah, the key hyphen value format in BCP 47 was replaced by key equals value here for better parsing. So what we noticed was that if we did key hyphen value, so in this case U hyphen CA hyphen Hebrew, that based on the rules for IANA time zones, that wasn't a good grammar. That wouldn't you know uh, that wouldn't reliably parse, because it couldn't tell between the generalized boxes and the time zone box. So that was a problem, and therefore we replaced the hyphen with the equals, and now the grammar is much more uh, simpler and uh, deterministic. And so we have implemented this in the temporal polyfill that we maintain, and it is already work in progress in browsers. So this is somewhat specified. The grammar is somewhat specified in the temporal spec, and we of course plan to normatively refer to an RFC once that's up. But for now, and browsers are already starting to implement that. So what's next for this draft and for us? So uh, the temporal groups intends to ship in browsers soon, but the problem is that we really shouldn't be shipping anything that's not yet standards tracked. So we plan to adopt this document before shipping, so that there's some stability and some standard to fall back to. It doesn't seem to be a great idea to try to standardize a timestamp format in a language spec. Uh, and yeah, I request you to all please review the draft if you haven't yet and send us your thoughts. And the implementation details that I talked about just now are of course not finalized. We can talk about them in more detail, uh, but that's just what we've come up with so far. Uh, and yeah, let's adopt this as soon as we can. Thank you. So yeah, that's it for me. Let's see.
I know Neil had one question during, so before you stop sharing the slides, just turn your sound on, Neil.
I just had a query. You had an example back on that about slide 6. And it seemed to show both a time zone name and also had a Z on the end indicating it was a UTC time. Was that a mistake? Was it because that seems odd?
No, it isn't actually. Yeah, thank you. That's a great question. The thing is that this is the instant itself. So the instant includes the offset part. That could be Z, or that could be plus minus anything, like offsets do. And then this part, the human time zone, is for the additional context and for the daylight saving rules and so on. So uh, the actual uh, instant itself does not really depend on this, because the result of the offset. So let's say if there wasn't an offset here, right? If there was just a date time as well as uh, a time zone. And so the time zone is not a offset. It could refer to multiple offsets, and which offset it is would depend on the date time. There, and even then, it's not confirmed, because there could be a particular date time that reoccurs in different offsets for the same time zone, right? So when London is at +1, I could have, say, 5 p.m., and then it goes to +0 again, and then now I have 5 p.m. again. Uh, uh, in So because of this, the instant remains the same. The actual resolution of the instant still depends on the offset, and this additional sort of value of the human time zone comes is more relevant once you start doing things like, hey, what happens when I progress like 2 days from this instant.
Sure. I seem to recall in an earlier draft there was an option not to have that. I'll have to look at what the draft currently says, see if that's still the case. It does seem to me it's useful also to be able to say it's this time, although in the time zone, and that's it. Although I agree there is the issue of sometimes two possibilities there. We have a resolution algorithm for that. I guess my main concern though then is the draft intending to provide any advice on what to do if that instant doesn't exist in the time? Well, okay, we're doing some Z. Yeah, okay, never mind. All right, sorry. I guess my sorry. I shall come back. Let the others go.
Pete?
Yeah, so I'm trying to get my head around exactly what Neil's trying to get his head around. What if I put some time zone in there that was in the instant time that had nothing to do with the one in the square brackets? Is that okay?
So because this is just additional information that has nothing to do with the with locating the instant on the timeline or something, uh, it's then up to the implementation, right? So it has two pieces of information. It has an instant and it has a time zone. Sorry, and the time zone in no way corresponds to this instant. So
Right.
in temporal, what we do is that we throw in this case. So we say, okay, this is a valid string, like by the protocol, but we cannot accept that within the implementation. And I suspect most implementations would do something similar, but this is still compliant, right? You can have whichever time zone you want in here, and if that doesn't make sense, if this information doesn't make sense, uh, the location of the instant in the timeline doesn't really change, because you have all the information you want right here. uh, but then the implementation could do what it feels best in
Well,
this
and
case.
so let me ask about this, because,
Mhm.
and this goes back to some of the thoughts I was having when you presented this at dispatch. It seems to me that you do have two separate pieces of semantics here. You've got what time is it now relative to universal time. This particular time says, it's somewhere around 10:47 in the morning in universal time. So that's what that Z is telling me. And so I can calculate universal time from this. And even if it had minus 0600, I could calculate universal time from the left-hand side. The stuff on the right-hand side is telling me what, summertime rules I should apply, where things might switch. And that does seem like semantically separate information. So I'm not sure why an implementation ought to reject something like this, because the implementation should either say, I'm looking for what this is in universal time, or I'm looking for what, for instance, recurrence rules might be with regard to this time. And therefore, it's going to look to the right, not to the left.
Right. So as I said, like, yeah, the implementations could do something, could essentially do whatever they feel best, of course, in these cases, right? In case of temporal, we realize that a offset that doesn't really match in any way with this time zone would most likely be a programmer error, because that's what we are usually dealing with. Uh, and uh, so we decided that the general case in this scenario would be to throw, unless the programmer uh, specifies what logic to do when they mismatch. Uh, but I suspect there could be many more interesting things to do in this case. I mean, one thing would be to just downgrade this like downgrade the result of this mismatched string to a sort of object that exists, and you can do operations like comparisons on it. But then as soon as you do arithmetic operations on it, it doesn't work, because you cannot do arithmetic operations on it without that context, right?
I guess what I would say is you should probably put on hold the idea that this should be implementation dependent or rejected, because it might be the case, and I think it's worth more discussion, that these kind of things might be useful. What's producing the instant time might be a very separate process or a separate piece of code than what's producing what is my locale and what rules should I apply to ongoing times. And so I think it's an interesting question. Um, as to whether these really should be treated as separate pieces of data that are independent of each other in some way.
Yeah,
As mentioned in the chat, someone is typing who is unmuted. You might want to mute.
That'll be me, I guess. Sorry.
Yeah, I think I'm starting to understand what you mean here more. So I've thought of use cases like these, right? You could have, say, a database that stores just the timestamp part, right? And it changes everything to universal time. So it sort of does the offset handling, let's say, before storage. And so you're getting this timestamp part maybe from some other place, and then this is stored in another venue, and then you're maybe compiling this on the fly. So I understand like that there are use cases like these, and I think I what I don't understand is that what I'm suggesting here is can perfectly work with that, right? I mean, it's even if there's a mismatch,
Absolutely.
this
I don't disagree with that part. And so I think it's worth discussion. And I'll finish off, so I'll let Keith, hop on. But I'll finish off by saying I think a lot of this, sort of applicability context, where you would use these things and why and how they get used, is probably worth adding to the document in some way. Because I think people are going to have lots of different uses for these sorts of things, and it's probably worth explaining somewhere in the document. If you're using this for simple "what time is it now" stamps, you probably don't want the right-hand side, all of the additional suffixes. Whereas if you're using it and it's therefore going to be calculated for things in the future or the past, you probably do want to include the time zone information where this thing was created. So I think it's worth considering that. But I'll hop out and let the next person go.
Yeah, no, that sounds like great advice. Thanks. I think maybe we could add a use cases section or something like that in the draft, and we could talk then in more detail about what kinds of different information would be relevant in which cases, and in which cases you could just safely ignore them. So that way it could be both a sort of guideline for producers, but also like consumers, where I could say, hey, I'm building this sort of application which doesn't really do any calendaring, doesn't really do any scheduling. So I could just focus on the instant part and just ignore everything else because it's not necessary for my particular class of applications.
All right, Keith.
All right, I'm Keith. So I definitely appreciated the sort of example use cases that you gave in the presentation. That was something that I didn't think was necessarily clear from the document, though that's sort of what came to mind, having done some work in the area. And I think you did clarify a lot of this based on the previous discussion about how kind of the left-hand side is dealing with what is the particular instance of time that's being described, and the right-hand side with the time zone is more how to deal with adding months and figuring out how that would translate. One thing that kind of went against it that you said, though, is would you be allowed to have a time on the left that doesn't have something that's designated the offset? I'm just thinking that could be sort of difficult, where most of the time you don't need to look at the right-hand side with the textual time zone to figure out what the instance is, but sometimes you might.
Yeah, I thank you, Keith, for that question. That that is something that has troubled us quite a lot, and it has troubled us because on one hand there are important reasons for sort of forcing people to have things like the offset here, because that way the value of the instant itself does not really depend on some of this information which we, as we mention in the doc that like we consider this additional information, additional context, and so it feels that it doesn't seem to be a great idea if this optional context can affect what's the resolution value of this part, right? But at the same time, I've talked to many people who work on calendaring applications or things that deal with timescales, for example, who would be very happy to see something like that. And what I suspect is that it's a tricky problem, but I think it might have solved itself in a way. So right now, what we do is that we no longer deal with any of this part, right? Any of the part on the left is just we defer to our C3239 and we just specify the suffixes. So this would essentially mean I feel that uh, any standard that feels that it's compliant with or can replace our C3239's instant values could essentially attach and use this extension format, right? It's not what we have in the draft itself. The draft itself uses 3239, but some of the implementations could sort of de facto something like that. So that's what I feel. I'm looking forward to working with some of the people who work more on these applications, like calendaring, which sort of need this offset part, for example, to just go away, and see if there's a better way to address their use cases. Because I don't, and I don't have enough context about these cases. But yeah, I think it's there's certainly a lot of strong use cases for allowing some parts to be skipped. The temporal the temporal implementation also does allow the offset to be skipped in some cases, but then it also it's it works out for us because it also doesn't need the time zone information in those. It just allows you to have like a bare date, right? And then you can specify a calendar with the date. So that's what we use that for. But yeah, I can understand real use cases for skipping some of this information. Unfortunately, the doc does not reflect that yet, and yeah, I'm not sure what the best resolution would be.
Okay. So another thing that I just want to bring up is that time zone name is typically referring to an external system file, at least in Unix, that might change. It might be a file that you don't have. And so one thing that I sort of thought about leaving out the offset and the instance is if you're actually talking about something in local time in the future, if the zone information gets updated, you might actually not interpret the date as the same instant if your information file gets updated. And that would kind of lead me towards thinking that you probably don't want to ever use that particular zone for trying to figure out when that time is.
Oh, wait, just to understand better, but this only happens when you do not include the offset, right? Because
that's
if
correct.
you do include the offset, it doesn't matter. Yeah.
Yes.
So
it's well defined if you have an offset.
Right. That is exactly the reason why we, and I mean, it doesn't even, in case of temporal, it doesn't even matter if the time file like doesn't change right below you, because I mean you could try to round trip between different services and so on, and then like it can change in a million ways. You could send a timestamp to somebody on like a different system, and things could just get funny. So I completely understand. That's precisely why we right now require all of the information. And yeah, any sort of effort that uh, makes parts of this optional would of course need to sort of justify what to do in these sort of edge cases where things get tricky to sort of pinpoint. Right?
All right, thank you.
Thanks.
Okay. Hi, I'm Neil again. I've woken up a little bit more now. So including the offset does not work for calendaring systems because time zones, daylight savings rules change. They're political. They can and do change at any time. And if you schedule something at 1 p.m. 6 months in the future and the time zone rules change, you want to be able to semantically say, no, I still want it to be at 1 p.m., not have it shifted to now 2 p.m. because I stored this as a timestamp. That's kind of the whole reason that you store it. So all the calendaring stuff you store as the wall clock time plus the time zone name, including the time zone offset as well, seems just really weird at this point. I mean, you could include it as it was at the time, and then you have to deal with what happens if if it doesn't match, but the time zone name is actually the important bit, not the offset. It's not actually a timestamp at that point. Importantly, it's a date. Its resolution does depend on the time zone information. And my original understanding of temporal, that maybe it's changed since I last looked at it, was that you have objects that represent this, like a wall clock time plus time zone, and even a wall clock time on its own. And that doesn't seem to be stuff that you can represent in a serialized way here, which is surprising because that's what you originally brought, I thought, and that's what you needed.
So in the context of temporal, this format is used in what we call a zone date time, which is essentially just an instant, and like it's a tuple which has an instant as well as a time zone object. So this is what it serializes to. I completely understand.
So I'm going to check that. Would it actually serialize to Z or to +000? Is it the current offset in that time zone? Because Z is specifically UTC, which is not necessarily there. Like Europe one is actually a poor example for this one.
Yeah, I'm not sure if it goes to +0, but is there any semantic difference between Z and +000?
Not really, except it's more interesting of, is it meant to be encoding the current offset in the time zone rules it understands at this time? But even then, you're losing what the wall clock time was. It's okay.
But the wall clock time can be deduced from this tuple, right? With both of these things.
Not if you've changed for the offset. Like, if you should be able to get the wall clock time by just truncating at the offset. Otherwise, we're going to not be able to resolve the correct information if the time zone definition changes, which it can and does.
Right. So
if this was in Berlin and you stored that as UTC with Z, you've lost information that's critical.
Right. Yeah. So that's I guess one of the trade-offs that I was hinting to when discussing Keith's question, right? So it's really useful for, I completely understand, for calendaring applications to be able to skip the offset part, but then that means that whatever your resolution of this timestamp value is essentially depends on this additional context. So then it's no longer optional; it's necessary. And
yes, that's a requirement for calendaring.
Yeah, but the thing is that then it starts getting more interesting when you consider some of the other tags that we are talking about, right? So if I say things like if I don't specify the timestamp like this, but instead specify a tuple or a format that serializes a Japanese date, and then say UCA equals Japanese, that could essentially be made to work as well. And there's merits and demerits to that, because you need to first deduce this information, like at the end you need to figure out the suffixes before resolving this, or before even parsing this, because the resolution, or in case of calendars, the parsing itself would depend on this value. And I think this is also relevant for the class of use cases that require time scales. I'm not very proficient with those use cases, but I've been talking to some of the people in NTP who are very interested in the possibilities of that. So what I propose is that we should talk about this exact class of use cases uh, within the working group. So we could talk about the uh, the different ways where we would resolve things, and in case that we allow the offset to not be included, and if we can reach a settlement in a way that it satisfies everyone, and it sort of helps the format, I'd be more than happy to sort of allow that use case. I mean, that's the whole point of the initiative, right?
It's like we definitely have a work item to do here before we publish the document, obviously, but there seem to be two things here, one of which is the requirement to have the left-hand side understandable in isolation without any of the right-hand side parts, which is encoded in our charter, that it should be possible for a client that doesn't understand the right-hand parts to still parse the left-hand part, and also the idea of replacing the floating date plus time zone that is in calendaring systems already. There are plenty of use cases that require that. There are also plenty of use cases that want a point in time, particularly for the past, when you know what point in time something happened. For the future, it's harder to predict exactly what point in time something will happen, and you might want to address it in different ways that are not exact UTC time. But anyway, Henk was next, so I think my question was covered by what Neil had, so I'm going to pop out of the list, and Henk, go for it.
Hi, thanks. Yeah, this is Henk. I'm not trying to elaborate on the actual complete contribution, as I don't really understand what problem has been solved, but that might just be me. So this is just a Henk problem, I assume. But speaking as one of the people who is interested in doing the CBOR time tag, we realize to some extent, yeah, that time zones are fluid. They are political, human-made things, and they're in flux. So if everybody who has a subscription to a TZ announce knows there are updates there, and these change. So whatever is processing this needs these updates, first of all. And so you are adding complexity by now having dependency of not just knowing an arbitrary offset, but you have to resolve what Europe-London means. I mean, London might have changed its time zone after Brexit, I don't know, or Europe might introduce the summer daylight saving time thing, or basically get rid of it. And so this might all change. So whatever uses this has to resolve that. And that is a dependency to some other, so like TZ announce. And then you actually never really know for the future how that works. So I don't know in which time zone London is in 20 years. Although I cannot express that exactly in UTC, I think it was applied, because that it is impossible to define a date in the far future with UTC. But then we realized that probably the most safe way to do this is to use, and this is not a joke, geodetic systems like WGS to say where that is in the future, and then at that point when it comes out, find out which time zone that is now. Is it still +6, or is this now +5 or 5.5? I don't know. So that is something that is also again adding complexity here. So again, not really realizing what the problem is that is solved. I just wanted to highlight you are adding complexity, and quite a lot of it here, right? So just be aware of that.
Yeah, absolutely. So I think this is best encapsulated and addressed by the sort of point raised by Pete and the sort of resolution that we reach for it, which is that I agree that not all the that there can be in at some point in the future a very large set of accepted values that can be included at the end of this ring, right? And different sets of these values can be useful for different applications.
But my clock has to update. My clock, the thing that is, I don't know, consuming this timestamp has to consume something else now.
Right, but so that's only relevant if your clock is utilizes this information. In which case, it should already be. And so, if let's say there is a timestamp, a time scale mentioned after this, and I am just a regular calendar developer, I don't care about timescales because I'm not building anything that would be atomic time. I wouldn't care about it, and I could just ignore that value safely. If I am building tools that only care about things in Gregorian calendar, I wouldn't care about the calendars. So I don't have a dependency on Unicode anymore.
Yeah, now I would be very careful here, because you're mixing calendars, which is a thing how to distinguish days, with time scales, which is how seconds are counted. That is different things, I think, because, for example, I don't know, UTC TI or UT1 or UT2, these are different time scales. They typically have different epochs, or could have the same epoch. And calendars are, I think, yet another thing. And I think it's very important to not mix up the idea of counting days in calendars and representing time, as I think we are trying to do here.
I think that's I think that's sort of exactly the point I was trying to make, is that the set of values that can and should be represented eventually at the end of this would vary significantly, right? Some of them would be useful for certain kinds of applications, and then others for other kinds of applications. And I think the complexity that is added per a implementation is only relevant to which information you actually want to consume. So if I'm building a implementation that just only cares about the instant, maybe I am just grokking timestamps for a logging tool, and I really don't care about anything that is at the end of this, I could ignore all of it. And so the idea is that you could selectively pick the values that are relevant to you, and that you're you would be consuming, and everything else is just additional information that's not useful to you. So only that much complexity is being added. Sorry.
But then I would just part with a very, very, very subjective individual comment. When I write emails, and if I orchestrate an event between participants in different time zones, I always say, like, it's PDT, EDT, BT, BST, and CEST, for example, at the moment, and then write them all down just for people to make it easier, and then I give a plus offset, so people don't have to understand what does CST mean. I mean, not everybody knows. So it's a +2 at the moment. So that's interesting to people. And that is what they consume, the extra digit. And they don't care if I'm Berlin, but they care that I'm 2 hours plus to the UTC Z here. And so that's my personal assumption. But again, maybe I'm not really getting the problem statement and the thing they're trying to solve. And so, but again, my comment was about adding complexity. Just be careful about that.
Yeah, regarding the case for that, I suspect you're only sending out such wait, am I audible?
Yeah.
Oh, okay. Sorry, the interface doesn't show me as speaking. Anyway, so you're only sending those emails out for, say, the next meeting where I mean, of course, you deterministically know the offset, but and it's just right away. But if you were saying, if you were sending out emails for 5 months into the future, you would, I mean, still deterministically know the offset, but things could change. And so on. And a couple of years into the future, you can't even tell because Europe might remove daylight savings, right? And so
yeah,
on.
but if you're going years into the future with UTC, you run into the leap second problem. And yes, that might be okay for humans, but most certainly is not okay for machines.
Right, which is why you can specify the time scale that we are talking about, right? It's and then you can say, hey, this is not. So, for example, temporal is an example. I think I've mentioned it quite a bit at this point, but yeah, temporal doesn't account for leap seconds. It's just assumes
like a tie or
Unix
whatever
involved.
GPS that has a static offset of 16 or whatever what that was.
Right.
And so yeah, but this is UTC, so this you are basing it on the 333 something, and I guess that's UTC. You're stuck with that, right?
Right.
So that doesn't mean anything about any other time scale.
We talked a bit about this with the NTP folks, and I feel that we could have productive discussions with them to figure out their exact use cases. I'm not well versed enough with the use cases in the space yet to actually do much myself.
Again, my comment was basically targeted around complexity due to resolution, and that's basically.
Yeah, I think we're going in circles a bit here, Hank. Shall we move on to John?
One comment that there's been a thread in the chat to which people should pay attention, but more generally, and drawing somewhat of the comments or the loop has just been made. The syntax here is easy. The use cases get complicated. The more of them there are, the more complicated it gets. And I just like to strongly encourage any results that come out of this process to be very clear about where applicability, what applicability of this means, where it's applicable, where it may not be applicable, and to spell out whatever the kinds of issues are which have just been discussed in other ones that apply to each of those use cases, or narrow it down completely and say this is good for these three things, and whether it works for anything else is a matter of future investigation. But we're in danger of getting into very extreme hand waving here, and that's not good for anybody. Thanks.
That's perfectly reasonable. Thanks. I think either way we progress, we can strongly make a case for the different information that sets of information we care about right now. So I think if we after discussions about this, if we end up with a solution that restricts the set of information to say three things, that's workable, and yeah, just an implementation detail. I wouldn't be too sad about it.
That's exactly what I'm referring to. Somebody saying implementation detail and then throwing a lot of this into a rat hole. These things are not implementation details, they're principles, which are different for different kinds of applications and contexts, and they really need to be spelled out or explicitly excluded.
Right. Yeah, I understand. The downside, or maybe potential downside of specifying all the different sets of values within the document is of course, I mean, not a downside if you like that kind of strictness, would be that any additional information that can be supported by the format would need an update to the RFC itself, which is a long process. So yeah, there's a trade-off there, and I don't feel strongly about the way it's done currently. So what I meant was that if there's a strong case for either direction, I'd be happy with.
We know how to create registries and things like that too. But the point is that this is going to likely have different meanings in different contexts, which it quite easily could. Then that needs to be made very clear.
Right. Yeah. Another point, likely in the favor of that argument, was that BCP 47, although it's a nice kind of format to do these kinds of things, it is a very different use case, right? It's locales, and that I don't feel that it's as sensitive information. Hopefully, I mean, I'm hoping that there's no possibility of including it, longitude, latitude within a locale string, right? But that things could be different here. So I agree if we decide to go more strict in this particular case.
One we had in the queue for now. Certainly, there are a couple of issues there that we know we're going to need to resolve in future versions of this draft before it's ready for publication. Was there anything else? Because we've spent all that time focusing on this one specific issue. Anything else that people wanted to talk about here?
If there's nobody, maybe I could ask a question.
Yeah, go.
So it's more about the IETF process, but I think it's relevant in this case. So from what I'm familiar with in the TC39 process, what we do is that when we're progressing the different proposals, right? We while progressing up the stages, we have a point where we say, okay, this is the committee has achieved consensus that this is a problem that we feel is worth solving, and so this can progress. We haven't we don't have consensus on the exact details around how we want this to be solved exactly, but we do agree that this is a problem worth being solved, right? So I when I think about the IETF process, I think that's it's analogous to adopting, I feel, right? So adopting the document essentially means that we that we agree that this is a problem that needs to be addressed, and now the working group can work together and address that problem, of course, in whatever way everybody agrees is a good idea. So my question then would be that these are all great concerns, and I agree that these are all important things that we need to talk in detail about. But are these things that are these things that can be done within the working group after adoption, or do any of these actually block adoption and need to be resolved before we do that?
Yeah, I think as Pete said in the chat, the creation of the working group was the part of agreeing that this is a problem that needs to be solved. yeah, adopting is deciding that this document's the right starting point for that, as Pete says in the chat again, which is basically what I was going to say, that yes, adopting the document means saying that we're happy to use it as a starting point. It's where we're happy to go from, but it doesn't mean that we're happy it's in the final shape. So I very much doubt that we're going to get any strong pushback to adopting the document as a starting point. One thing that I didn't specifically put in the slides that we will need to consider during this session is co-authors potentially, if there's someone else who wants to work on the document with you. So I will certainly be doing a call for volunteers to co-author the document, someone who you're happy to work with and someone who's happy to work with you, ideally with some more experience with IETF documents.
Absolutely, that would be great.
I guess we're basically there if there aren't any more questions about the document as it is now. The other question will be workflow, whether you prefer to use GitHub issues or emailing list threads to keep track of what's being worked on. Discussion will definitely happen on the mailing list either way.
Personally, I don't really have a preference there. I'm comfortable either way. I would be happy to use whatever works best in sort of for the person who is contributing. Right? So I'd be happy to accept their contributions.
All right. Does anyone want to step forward to volunteer to help with the document? Just watching everyone step back all at once. All right, I can take a call to the mailing list. Sounds like we'll be taking a call to the mailing list then. Yeah, yes, twisting arms is going to be the definitely the way to go here. All right. Well, the other question here was milestones and any other business. So do we have any other business first? And let's have a look at the milestones as well. I'm going to drop these slides now and reshare the chair slides. All right, so our existing milestone is for December this year to submit the document. Obviously, I will be adding a milestone for formal adoption of the draft in August 2021 at this rate. The question of can we move faster, I think, has basically been solved with it is unlikely that will be done before December 2021, given that we have a couple of significant open questions and we don't have a volunteer second editor yet, but certainly we'll move faster if people participate quickly. So let's try and hit December, particularly since browsers are keen to get this thing out. So the longer we take, the more they will be pushing to break away from us. And the only other slide I have, does anyone want to comment on milestones? Any suggestions there before we move on? All right, and finally, do we have any other business for this working group, or do we finish 50 minutes early? I'm seeing a lot of nothing. All right, thank you, everybody. It's been a good first session, I think, overall, apart from the lack of volunteers. I'll get my arm twisting working. And I'll see you next time. See you on the mailing list.
Great. Thank you, everyone. See you soon. Bye-bye.
All right. Thanks. Bye, everyone.